I'm Gordon Ridgeway. This meeting is being recorded for the public and posterity. And I'd like to welcome everyone to the Cornwall Housing Forum. And this is on our affordable housing plan. And I'd like to start out by thanking the committee for their hard work over the last year, trying to come up with a constructive housing plan that meets Cornwall's needs. It was one of the goals of the current Board of Selectmen to have a housing forum. And now we're having one. And we're also here tonight because the state requires each town to have a housing plan. And again, thanks to the committee and Janelle Mullen, who has been working to get our thoughts into a very readable form. And that's what we're here to talk about tonight. You've probably seen the agenda, and we are going to have some presentations, introductions by myself, Ingrid Ellen, Jill Cutler, and Heather Deneen, and then a presentation on the plan itself by Janelle Mullen. And I would just like to say, as part of our context, even though we are required to do this work by the state statute, Cornwall has a long history of grappling with this issue of affordable housing and trying to make sure that our community has a variety of housing options for people. Before I was on the Board of Selectmen, I helped and served on the Cornwall Housing Corporation in the 1980s. And at that time, programs were put in place, and planning and zoning sought to incorporate more opportunities for affordable housing in the town, as it recognized it was one of the primary issues facing the town in the 1990, 2000, 2010, and now the 2020 town plan of conservation development. There are segments of all those plans that built on each other, and that is really the start, the foundation under which this plan has been grown. So I'd encourage everyone, if they haven't read the comprehensive plan of conservation development, which is available on the website, to do so. And I think one thing I would like to relate to, that since the town and community have been involved with trying to get a variety of housing in town, a lot of the programs and regulatory changes have been successful in meeting those early goals of trying to have a variety of housing options. And this has allowed many people to live in Cornwall who otherwise would not be able to do so. And I was reflecting recently on the variety of people that we have had be able to live here because of that. They've been firefighters, EMTs, both professional and volunteer. They've been school teachers, school workers, school bus drivers, artists, craftspeople, landscapers, farmers, farm workers, lifeguards, food pantry workers. Really a backbone of the community has been able to be here because of some of these programs. And one of my colleagues, a neighboring town's first selectman, expressed to me this summer that he wished his town had been as proactive as Cornwall had been in some of these programs to start these efforts earlier. Because what we have seen recently, of course, is the price of real estate has gone up tremendously, a decline in rental availabilities. And so that has made these problems even more extreme than they were years ago. And what we know is this is a national, statewide problem, a national problem. The Wall Street Journal this week reported that the average housing price in California is now $800,000. That's even higher than it is in Cornwall, but shows you that Cornwall is in the middle of something that is also being faced by communities throughout our country. And the Wall Street Journal also projected that the housing prices would go up almost 20% next year on top of what they've already escalated. So you can see we're right in the middle of something that's very large and very important. As far as our process goes, this is an open forum, and we thank everyone for attending. We encourage people's written comments as well as verbal comments they may make tonight. Written comments will be posted on the website, and if people if they want to write as comments after tonight, that's fine. But the committee is meeting to review the comments on Monday, so we would ask you to get those comments into us as soon as possible. But this is not the last meeting. This is not the last word on this plan. Eventually, the Board of Selectmen does have to approve this plan. We are moving towards finalizing this plan, and there will be another hearing that we have tentatively set for December 8th after the committee again reflects on what they hear tonight and what written comments they get. So again, thanks for you. We've already received some thoughtful comments. We thank you for those, and we will be further discussing that as time goes on. So that's enough out of me. And but again, thank you all for being part of this process. And now I would like just to, for Ingrid Ellen, who served on our committee, to give us a little context of how this fits into other things that have been going on with housing in the region. Ingrid.
Thanks, Gordon, and thanks to all of you for being here. It's really, really nice to see so many people, at least on Zoom. And I just want to say I very much appreciate the chance to be part of this Affordable Housing Committee. And I'm happy to make just sort of a few introductory grounding comments before we get into the presentation. I'm going to be very brief. First, on the substance, in my day job, I teach and I study housing. And I think that the key takeaway, I really could summarize the findings of all my research in 2 words, which is that housing matters. Maybe 3 words, housing matters a lot. I have been doing a lot of research over the last few years, looking at how much of a difference affordable housing makes in the lives of families and children. And our research shows that children whose families are able to move into affordable housing see improvements in physical health. They're less likely to end up in the emergency room. They do better in school. They see a whole host of really concrete, measurable improvements in their lives. And yet we simply don't have enough affordable housing. The COVID pandemic, as Gordon said, has led to soaring prices and rents around the country, and especially in smaller communities. But this latest sort of surge has come on top of really a decades-long secular decline in affordability across the country. In 1970, which is actually the year that my parents bought their house in Cornwall, about a quarter of renters around the country were rent burdened, which means that they pay more than 30% of their income on rent. That's sort of the standard. So in 1970, less than a quarter of renters around the country were rent burdened. And today that share is half of renters. So we've gone from a quarter of renters to a half of renters in this 50-year period. And Cornwall is no exception, right? As Gordon said, there are a vanishing number of affordable rentals in Cornwall. The median sales price of a home in Cornwall, I think, rose to $550,000 in 2020, which was far out of reach of the median earner in town. And a big part of this problem is that communities haven't allowed new housing to be created. Now, to be clear, right, Cornwall can't solve this problem on its own, right? This is a big macro problem. But on the other hand, local communities can take actions that really make a difference. And I think all of us want Cornwall to continue to be open to households with a range of incomes. And I also just want to say a little bit about sort of the planning process. I mean, Gordon spoke a little bit about this, but while the state mandates that every community prepare a plan, every town prepare and adopt an affordable housing plan every 5 years, it doesn't dictate what the content of those plans, right? It's up to local residents to decide what should be in those plans. And our committee took this planning process seriously as an opportunity to think about some ways to support affordable housing in Cornwall that would fit with the Cornwall context. And we aim to build on the town's recently adopted plan of conservation and development to suggest some ideas for how to make Cornwall more affordable and inclusive while balancing the town's other planning goals. And I also want to say, to be clear, right, plans like this, right, they don't have the force of law, right? The elected officials in town would ultimately have to decide, right? They have to decide to adopt this plan. They have to decide what particular ideas they want to adopt, and also, frankly, build out the specifics around those ideas, right? This plan is fairly high level. And finally, what we're presenting today and discussing is very much of a draft, and we very much look forward to hearing your feedback and your suggestions. Thanks to all of you who have already submitted have already submitted helpful suggestions. We will have time for public comment today, but I wanted to add, you can, if we run out of time, or frankly, if you just feel more comfortable, you're welcome to submit your comments into the chat. I'm going to be monitoring that, and I will do my best to, if time permits, to read out as many as I can. But please know that even if I don't read your comment out publicly tonight, we will read it as a committee, and we will consider it as we revise this draft. So thank you. And I think that I am turning it over to Jill, who I think is on mute.
Thank you, Ingrid. Gordon asked me to say a little bit about the plan of conservation and development and how it relates to this housing committee, because the plan of conservation and development is something that was developed by the town of Cornwall. So many of our housing goals came out of that plan and were formulated by the people of this community. And I think that one thing that has to be said is that Cornwall is unique in many ways. As we know, there's been a lot of argument about whether we're unique, but in fact, we are unique. But we're also very like a lot of other small rural towns in that we are a 19th century town with housing that might have been really good for 19th century people and for the needs that they had. They had large families. A lot of them were farming people. In the late 19th century and early 20th century, many of the people who lived in Cornwall actually worked in Torrington and other places where there were factories. And as we know, those factories don't exist. So there's been a loss of employment, and we now have a town that has a lot of one-family homes with 3 and 4 and 5 bedrooms. And we need houses for younger people, for smaller families. And as we know, because we've lost some older residents, we also need housing for older residents. And the people on the housing section of the Plan of Conservation and Development were aware of all those issues. And their goals were to increase the number of affordable housing units, to support the Cornwall Housing Corporation, to increase attainable rental units. And by that, I mean units where, in fact, the people made more money than affordable housing would allow them to make, but not really enough money not to be rent burdened, to help first-time home buyers and support them in some way, and to help homeowners in general make their homes energy efficient and accessible. And those were our goals. And basically, we knew that the Planning and Zoning Board was going to have to do a lot of work to make some of the changes that would make these goals a reality. Like Ingrid, I would say the Planning and Zoning Board is responsible to the town for its work. So the Planning and Zoning Board has to do a lot of work, but it also has to present its work to the town for feedback and approval. I think there's a lot of anxiety around the issues of change and how do you change things that are so entrenched. But I think we also all know in some way, if we can't increase the number of young people, if we can't increase the number of students for our school, we will not have a town, we'll have a museum of sorts. And that isn't, I think that is not what Cornwall wants. I think Cornwall wants something else. I think that's, I think that I'm just reminding people that they actually formulated these goals. These goals are Cornwall's goals. And the Planning and Zoning Commission will do its best. It's a slow process and it's a careful process, and we should allow it to happen. And now I'm going to turn it over to Heather, who can tell you about the actual people who are going to be affected by this.
Thanks, Jill. And thanks for the opportunity to provide a little information. So over the course of the year, I typically see between 70 and 80 Cornwall households who come through the office. Sometimes those are just for one-time requests, often for fuel assistance. Other times they're weekly or sometimes daily requests for assistance. I always start by working with families to access any federal or state programs first. And then from there, we go to regional programs and then to the town food and fuel fund, which many of you have donated very generously to, especially during COVID. So I'll just provide some facts about the food and fuel fund and how housing has been supported through that fund over the past 3 years. So I'm using calendar year numbers here. In 2019, there was $5,260 that went toward paying people's rents, paying people's mortgages, supporting them with housing, and that made up about 11.6% of the food and fuel fund expenses for 2019 calendar year, which was about $45,000. And then in 2020, COVID hit, and we funded $21,183 toward housing. That was rent, mortgage, assistance to Cornwall residents, and the total spent from that fund that year was $73,884, which housing was 29%, which was a pretty big hit to that fund. And so far, through September 30th in 2021, the total expenses related to housing have been $6,700 out of $56,000 spent, which is about 12% of the funds expended so far. Since COVID, we have a new program in Connecticut called Unite CT, which is directly related to helping people with back rent payments. I am aware of 4 applicants in Cornwall to that fund. 2 of them have been approved, and as of this morning, Unite CT has funded about $16,000 in back rent payments to Cornwall landlords, and 2 applications are still pending. The regional resources that we access primarily are the Neighbor to Neighbor Fund, which is a fund of Berkshire Taconic. And in that fund, in 2019, I didn't put in any applications related to housing. In 2020, there was about $2,000, and in 2021, the same so far this year related to housing rental expenses. We also access funding for rental and mortgage payments through the Jane Lloyd Fund, which is managed through Berkshire Taconic and directly supports people who are undergoing cancer treatment. And we've had a few clients who've had support from that over the past few years. We also have partnerships with Women's Support Services who shelter women and children in Cornwall, and we provide direct support to them through the Food and Fuel Fund and a number of other resources. I will say that the Food and Fuel Fund, primarily through the food pantry, supports people in Cornwall with freeing up money. So if you access the food pantry and you're getting a lot of your food needs met through that, that's freeing up money that then you can use toward your rent or your mortgage. Or if you're applying for energy assistance and you're getting some relief on your heating bill or your electric bill, then that's freeing up money that then you can reallocate toward your rent or your mortgage. So that is a little bit harder to calculate how all of that impacts housing. But I do know that, and I'm sure all of my many posts and emails out every week show that the demand for food support in Cornwall is high, and it's maintained through the entire pandemic. So I think that that is freeing up a lot of money for people to be able to access, food and then be able to put money toward other things. So that's a little bit of a background. I would just also add a trend that we're seeing is, and we haven't really talked about here, is the number of people in Cornwall who are living rent or mortgage free, sort of residing in a barn or in a room or somewhere. And for those people, I think, it's a scary time because a lot of the houses are going on the market and people are, looking to sell, and that's left some of my clients pretty uncertain about where they're headed, and they don't qualify for many of the programs that I've referenced. So that's a segment of my client load that I spend a lot of time with right now.
Okay, thank you, Heather, for that update and all you do on a daily basis to keep people getting to a better place. So that's sort of like a little introduction from members of the committee on our context in which we're working. And now I'd like to have our planner, Janelle Mullen, go over the plan itself.
Great. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, first of all, for all of those in attendance, and for those that I haven't met yet, either virtually or in real life. I'm Janelle Mullen. I facilitated the creation of this plan as regional planner working for the COG. I'm going ahead and share my screen. And I will just be going over the context of the plan in brief and visit some of the data, but please access the plan, read it. We look forward to all of your thoughtful comments. All right. So the Affordable Housing Plan, what does it contain? The background information in the plan is really an overview of the planning process. So as mentioned by many members of the steering committee that are in attendance this evening, we've been meeting for about 9 months at this point in time. The plan outlines the planning process, gives a timeline of the work that we've done to date, and also gives a brief background of the existing affordable housing in Cornwall, gives a background of the definition of affordable housing. There are currently about 33 units in Cornwall that qualify in that state definition. The group also discussed the current legislation, which the Connecticut General Statutes addresses affordable housing in Chapter 126A of the Connecticut General Statutes. And we just discussed 830G, which is the precursor to affordable housing plans, which is more of a planning and zoning commission approach to affordable housing. And then 830G, which is this new legislation, which requires all municipalities to have a plan. And then we also reviewed the Cornwall Housing Corporation and the existing programs and the affordable housing that it supports in Cornwall. So the committee met and digested lots and lots of data as part of the planning process. Very much in the beginning of the planning process, the committee went through so much data and really digested trends that they're seeing over time. So just in brief, what the plan states are these facts. There was an increase in population from 2010 to 2020 of about 147 individuals in town. And during the same time period, there was an overall decline in the number of children. So that decreased by about 67 individuals. Currently, a third of households in Cornwall do not have children, while do have children, 1/3 do, while 2/3 do not. There are about 598 households in Cornwall. Overall, the population is aging, as we know, and according to the most recent census data, the population of Cornwall is expected to continue to decrease. The steering committee also reviewed, after looking at population, looked at existing housing and investigated related housing data. And they looked at the housing units in Cornwall are approximately 1,007. That's definitely the count of the state. There are numerous numbers for the number of housing units, and the committee really decided to go with the state's number for the purposes of this plan. 95% of the existing homes in Cornwall are single family dwellings, which simply means that that's a single house on a lot. Owning a home in Connecticut is costly. It is the third most expensive in the nation in terms of home maintenance. And the average yearly cost to maintain a home in our state is $17,782 annually. 40% of homes in Cornwall were built before 1939. That's just an important piece because the age of homes often does entail how much the cost of maintenance will then be and become over time. Next, the steering committee looked at the costs of housing and how they've changed over time and how the COVID pandemic has definitely influenced those changes. Numbers were thrown out before, but in 2020, the median sales price of a home in Cornwall was approximately $550,000. That's a 46% increase from 2019, when the median home price was $375,000. Housing growth is slow in the area. On average, town permit data has revealed that about 1 to 2 homes have been built per year since 1990 in Cornwall. And housing supply, therefore, given that the population has increased over this 10-year period and construction has pretty much slowed or stayed at a very slow, steady pace of 1 to 2 homes per year, housing supply, especially for renters and first-time home buyers, is pretty non-existent. 35% of households in Cornwall, so that's 209, are housing cost burden, which means that they spend 30% of their income on housing costs. And then 13%, that's approximately 78 households, spend more than 50% of their income on housing costs in town. After looking and combing through all of the data, the steering committee revisited, as mentioned by our previous speakers, both the current zoning regulations and how they govern housing, and then also looked back at the plan of conservation development to really guide them to develop goals for the housing plan and then strategies to help fulfill those goals. So the plan suggests the overall goals of this plan, of the affordable housing plan, is to increase the number of rental units available for residents and workers, to increase first-time homebuyer options, to consider zoning and permitting changes, to increase the availability and diversity of options for seniors, to increase public awareness of Cornwall's housing efforts, and to further support existing affordable housing and to connect citizens to housing resources. So I just want to mention a point that Jill Cutler mentioned before, and that's that many of these goals of the plan really do echo what the town plan says when that was established in 2020. And many of these goals that I will now discuss further, you might hear me repeating myself, and it's because oftentimes these strategies do overlap. So some strategies are looking to achieve several goals that are in the plan. The first goal being to increase the number of rental units. What the steering committee discussed and developed as strategies to achieve those goals include the following: to update the town zoning regulations to allow multifamily housing and mixed-use developments to be built by a nonprofit and/or a private developer, to amend the zoning regulations to allow for the conversion of existing homes, regardless of their age, to multifamily in specific areas, and also to encourage the Board of Selectmen and the Planning and Zoning Commission not to opt out of recent legislation, which is Public Act 2129, which enables accessory apartments by right and standardizes the parking requirements to 1 per accessory unit. The next goal being to increase first-time homebuyer options. The strategies that the steering committee developed around those goals include to encourage the private giving of land and funding to the Cornwall Housing Corporation, to allow them to build more housing through their parcel program, and to encourage private landowners to grant Cornwall Housing Corporation attainable housing cuts, and to increase the possibilities for smaller houses by examining the requirements for buildable areas and minimal housing size. The next goal being consider zoning and permitting changes, and the strategies associated with that goal include amend the zoning regulations to enable diverse housing options, such as co-housing and other community living opportunities, and to encourage the state to set aside its $60 land use permitting fee to the local housing trust fund to support the town's housing efforts. The next goal being to increase the availability of options for seniors. And those strategies involved include amend the zoning regulations to enable housing options other than single family dwellings, such as co-housing and other community living opportunities tailored for seniors. And again, to encourage the Board of Selectmen and Planning and Zoning Commission not to opt out of that Public Act 2129, which will enable accessory apartments by right. The next goal being increase public awareness of the town's housing efforts, annually conduct a town-wide housing forum, much like the one that was held in May, to continue the discussion around housing needs, housing options, and to verify progress of achieving the town of Cornwall's housing plan goals, and also to check in on housing related data. And then also establish a Cornwall Housing Commission to assist local housing efforts, including the establishment and administration of the Housing Trust Fund. And then finally, the last goal being support existing affordable housing and connect citizens to housing resources. These strategies involve establish a housing trust fund that functions as a community revolving fund. And we heard from Ron Goldstein of National Iron Bank about other towns that have developed similar programs. And this community fund can help to provide down payment assistance for first-time home buyers, as well as maintenance assistance to help seniors age in place. Next, to create a housing coordinator position to assist local residents with their housing needs and also connect them to resources, much like many of the programs, state and federal, that Heather did touch upon. And then finally, investigate property tax abatement opportunities for affordable housing and encourage the state to reinvigorate its program. That's a very brief overview of the plan. And I just want to leave everyone with this quote from Patricia Vanicki, who attended and spoke at our Cornwall Housing Forum in May. How does a home help someone achieve their goals? A house is more than a roof over our head. It is a building block of stability. It provides a myriad of opportunity. Will the town benefit from affordable housing? The answer is a resounding yes. I will stop sharing my screen. Great.
Okay. Thank you very much, Janelle, for your presentation and your work, pulling all these threads together into a really good document. So now we have, those are our presentations at this point, and we can open it up to comments. People can make statements, ask questions. Again, we'll try to answer questions. If there's an easy question, we'll answer it. If there's something we're not sure about, we will, again, take all questions down and get back to you with a correct answer. We'll try not to shoot from the hip because that's dangerous. But we will try to get questions answered, but people are free to make statements too. And again, people are encouraged to write in questions even after this is done. I would like to have people try to keep their statements to 3 minutes and let everybody have a chance to speak before people speak again. There are, I think, 58 people in attendance tonight. And so that's it. So John will moderate or pick people, the sequence in which people can talk. And then again, after we get through a series of questions, if Ingrid wants to break in with some questions from the chat site, we will have those. And again, we do have committee members here and other members that do have expertise in certain areas. So we may try to call on them if there's particular questions or comments that trigger thoughts. Okay, thank you. So John, do you have anybody in the queue?
Any raised hands?
Right, so people can use that option on the bottom of your screen is helpful. If
It's under the reactions menu at the bottom of the screen. Or you can just do that. Anyone? Nancy,
Jonathan,
Carey?
I think I see Rocco as well.
Oh, Rocco, please go ahead.
All right, can everyone hear me?
we can.
All right, Rocco Botto here. I just wanted to say thanks to this committee for all their hard work on the plan. Having closely followed the progress over the last year, I feel very confident that the proposed draft is a solid and a well-defined plan that's going to really help guide our town on really what is quickly becoming one of the most pressing issues facing our town today. With the cost of housing soaring and the rental market all but disappeared, housing for young adults, families, and seniors in Cornwall is now reaching a critical mass, and it's especially important for those that live, work, and serve in our community. I was particularly touched hearing some of the stories at the last forum in May, because I've been there and I know what it feels like to struggle to make a living in our town. You know, stories about Coogieman Village and how that served as a lifeline, for instance, for a hardworking family to be able to, you know, stay in our town and to have their kids graduate high school here. Or, you know, how Bonnybrook has allowed senior citizens to be able to stay in Cornwall in an affordable and safe space. It's been equally great to see such a great cross-section of our town working on the plan as well. You know, from young people that know it and live it every day, to experts in the field, to top leaders in our town, all trying to make a difference in the lives of people in our town and the future generations that will call Cornwall home. Thank you for all your hard work.
Thank you, Rocco. And I think one other comment too is I think as a committee, we were aware of a bunch of different needs that are out there, not just young families struggling to move into town or stay in town, but also our senior members. And it's one of the sort of tragedies of Cornwall that when people are at a certain age, they have to leave town that they've been in for a very long period of time because there's not many places available to downsize. And that's one of our goals is to, really open up some options for all ages. So, and not just government sponsored housing, but if there's possible for market rate housing, filling a need there for people that want to downsize their house. Again, we feel that's something that should be explored. So thank you, Rocco.
Kevin Conway. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Hi, sorry. I think I'm going to be a bit of a buzzkill, but I'll introduce myself first. My name's Kevin Conway. I am a part-time resident on Popple Swamp Road in Cornwall, and I have a modest house on 5 acres. Like a lot of people, since the pandemic has started, I've basically been living here and teleworking from home. I briefly went through the recommendations from this committee. And did I read it correctly that essentially we're looking to amend planning and zoning to allow multifamily housing or cluster housing anywhere? So I guess that's my starter question. I guess I do have a comment and an attitude that, a lot of us, I'm just gonna be honest with you, I pretty much am. Most people have moved to Cornwall because they want to live in a museum. This is a beautiful little housing museum, beautiful little swatch of New England, in proximity to New York and the metropolitan area, or even Boston. So anyway, if maybe someone could just quickly tell me the thoughts on, did I read it correct? Did I misread? You're gonna allow basically multifamily anywhere.
I can answer that. I thank you for your honesty, Kevin, and I appreciate your input. I think you did read the plan at this point. Is suggesting to allow multifamily housing anywhere in Cornwall. We do already allow accessory apartments throughout town and anywhere. And there are some actually on there are several on Popple Swamp Road and other roads in town. So in fact, we do in some places have the ability to have more than one family on a lot. But you did read it right. So, but again, I think it's important for people to make comments, and that issue has been brought up as an issue. Should multifamily housing being allowed everywhere in town or where? But the current draft, I believe, says anywhere in town.
So can I just clarify, Gordon? One thing is that this is not, first of all, I think that ultimately, again, this is a plan, and P&Z would have to consider any of these. They would have to adopt any of these changes. I think our idea was to encourage P&Z to make more opportunities available for multifamily housing. We're not specific about where. The other thing is, what we are specific about is that we weren't proposing multifamily housing to be built as of right.
And the other thing too is that all these proposals first have to be approved by planning and zoning, and also have to meet the health code. And the health code in Connecticut is very restrictive as far as being able to
on septic tanks, yeah.
On septic tanks. So,
yeah. And
again, Cornwall is noted, in addition to its for its challenging topography, especially in terms of septic. And it's in some cases it's very hard to site a house on a lot, let alone a multifamily house. So that's, again, that's something has not been, that's an open question in some ways. I mean, everything has to meet the health code, and in Connecticut's septic requirements are very rigorous.
Could I say something about that too? Would you mind?
Sure.
I'm Anna Tamelnik, Kevin, rather. I'm the chair of the Planning and Zoning Commission. I can't see how a multi-family unit could be built on a 1 acre zone. You know, it can't. And P&Z will have to consider all of those things when it comes down to it. We have, as you probably know, we have 1 acre, 3 acre, and 5 acre zoning in different parts of Cornwall. So all of that has to be considered. Gordon's statement about the geographic problems and the public water and septic issues are probably more important in terms of limiting our ability to do this. So I want to reassure you, you're not going to see multifamily housing popping up all over the neighborhood. I can't see it happening.
Okay.
And just one last thought on that too. The language comes directly from the Plan of Conservation and Development. So on page 10, a strategy in the adopted town plan does suggest that the town updates its town zoning regulations to allow multifamily that could be built by a nonprofit or a private developer. So a lot of the cues that the Housing Steering Committee took did indeed come from that town plan.
And it's already been pointed out to us, Kevin, that the market currently is not for multifamily housing as far as people going out, and there's very little land for sale in Cornwall, very little buildable land for sale in Cornwall. And the market at this point is for fairly expensive housing, not for multifamily housing. But our thought was, if somebody who was out there that wanted to say, put up several units of multifamily housing that would allow some of our seniors to live somewhere in town, or some of our young people to reestablish a rental market, then perhaps that's worth considering and trying. But again, any of these regulations which are any regulatory change would have to go through the fairly lengthy planning and zoning process anyway.
Yeah. Thank you very much all for your comments and responses. Again, just a last thought. I don't want to monopolize things. There are opportunities, I would think, in what's the little village where I live, Cornwall Bridge, where there are small houses. Some are in not as great repair as one might hope. For possibly breaking them up into apartments, that might help and maybe renovate them. I think the sanitary issues come into play there, just as they have in West Cornwall. But thank you very much. I'll leave it there. Again, I'm sorry to be contrarian, but I think people need to, I mean, if you live here full time, you're living in a museum and you just accept it. You know, it's just, you know, I live most of the time in New Jersey and I work in Manhattan, and this is a museum, and don't break the museum, maybe make it more affordable. So thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments, Kevin. Next, John.
Can I actually read one comment from the chat, just because it's
Sure.
right on point, Gordon?
Okay.
Which is, could you clarify how many families we mean when we say multifamily?
Janelle, I'll turn that over to you, because there are terms in this plan that can mean different things to different people. So it might be good just to identify what is co-housing, cluster housing, multifamily housing, accessory apartments. What do those terms generally mean?
Sure. So let's start with single family housing. So that's one house on a single lot. Multifamily Planning typically defines that as 3 or more housing units. A duplex would be 2 houses on a single lot. Gordon did mention co-housing. Co-housing tends to be ownership under one entity, and then different collaboration of housing in partnership is owned on that lot. That comes in a myriad of different ways. Accessory apartment would be what some would consider a half unit. It's actually a smaller unit than the primary dwelling unit. The state legislation does not distinguish whether it needs to be attached or detached. That's internal to an existing single family home or external to an existing single family home. They are smaller than the primary dwelling, but they do have the amenities that one could utilize to live on their own. So bathroom amenities, kitchen amenities, bedroom amenities. And then, did I miss anything, Gordon?
No, that's a very good summary.
Yeah, but multifamily tends to be, by definition, 3 or more dwelling units on a lot.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we had a JWWZ who had his hand up and he took it down. So I guess next is C's iPad. Could you identify yourself if you want to speak?
Oh, sure. It's Carolyn Nastro.
Hi, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'd like to bring up, following the point that Kevin made, that I'm just wondering why the committee included private developers in there when that has been an issue of kind of contention in the past. And I also think that you kind of can't have it both ways. You can't be saying that this is just recommendations and then at the same time referring to the plan of conservation and development, which is a similarly kind of quasi-legal document, as the reason why you're doing something. So I think it's a bit disingenuous to say that this is not a document that you're going to, that is not, it's sort of just kind of, you know, an informal kind of recommendation. It's not an informal recommendation. I think the entire town has to know that it's not. It's a recommendation that you're filing with the state that tells your intentions of what the town plans to do. And then you plan to have the P&Z endorse this document before the public hearing, which means that the P&Z is going to endorse the recommendations in there, which implies that they will then move forward to change the regulations. So I just think you really should make it clear to people that this is actually a document and this document has authority. It is not just kind of something that you guys whipped up together. And secondly, if you don't think that you can build huge developments on land here because of septic issues and all that, why not just not include that in the plan? Then why open it up to private developers? The second thing is regarding the accessory dwellings. You've even removed the, if I'm correct, you've even removed the zoning permit process for that. It's entirely as of right. And you've completely removed the special permit process from that and public input, which has not been the case before, as Maggie explained to us. And Maggie very clearly, Maggie Cooley, very clearly in several meetings pointed out the importance of the special permit process, how she feels it's very important to bringing people together and to making sure that everyone's on board with these projects. To alienate the community is no way to move forward with affordable housing and make it an issue that everyone gets around and that everyone supports. On and on, we're seeing the special permit process removed from, in the P&Z, we saw it with the home business minor regulations, and now we're seeing it again here. And I really don't understand why you would be stifling public input and public comment for something that is so important to the town. I don't think it's a good idea.
Okay,
I think Maggie Cooley.
Hi, am I talking? Am I
Yes.
hearable? Okay. Caroline, I think the accessory apartment lack of having that by right, that's absolutely stated in this new legislation. That wasn't something that came out of this plan. That was one of the principal changes in 21, 29 is that you have to have accessory apartments by
Oh, yeah.
right.
Yeah, you're,
Can I finish?
yeah, can I clarify? Sorry, I didn't,
No,
I
I'd
forgot
like
to
to
say,
finish.
I just forgot
I'd
to say
like
what
to
I was
finish.
primarily, I'd just like to clarify so you can answer me. Basically, I was referring to the square footage limitation, the way that it's an unlimited square footage limit that is not allowed, and no special permit applies to that. That's what
I
I'm
think
sorry.
that's also in the new legislation. But just because I've been quoted, it's important to me to reply, is we already have multifamily in town, sort of in a practical way, in the Cornwall Plains zone, which is where everybody's on very small lots. Almost none of those are of regulation size. You're allowed to have 3 apartments in addition to the owner occupied dwelling, which is effectively multifamily. The idea of throwing it open to private developers, I mean, it would be great if they would come. It's sort of unlikely, but it takes the burden off the housing corporation to be the only provider of multifamily, or the only permitted provider of multifamily. And obviously, this is what people have said over and over again, is that nobody is suggesting that multifamily anywhere would be an of right thing. If it were enacted, it would undoubtedly be by special permit, because that's just not going to fly. And I also, I'm not sure, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the intention was to push this through, anything through before more discussion. And I do think it's advisory. I don't think that this is creating legislation. It's suggesting. And all the legislation would have to go through a public hearing.
Thank you, Maggie. That's very helpful. I was just wondering, I thought that the state was recommending 1,000 square foot limit on accessory dwellings, and you guys are overriding that to be unlimited. Could you clarify that?
I can't, because I don't have the state statute in front of me a second.
I thought
Maybe
it was
Janelle.
my understanding that they weren't recommending unlimited size. They were just not, they were leaving those limits up to P and Z. That's what I thought. Is that right, Anna?
I think that's the kind of technical question that we should research instead of giving out answers that we may not be fully confident in. But again, I believe what John is saying, that this is basically saying you would have a by right ability to have accessory apartments, as opposed to have to go through a special permit process. Again, people can build a house of virtually unlimited size in Cornwall without a special permit. And so, as the governor has said, why not be able to put a apartment over your garage, with the same ability? So that's,
but you guys are talking about exterior dwelling. So I think if I read it correctly, you could have, for example, 3 houses, correct me if I'm wrong, on one property, and they could be unlimited square footage if they're accessory dwellings, exterior dwellings now. And that's different. When I remember Maggie explained it before, that's different than what happens now. Could you clarify that? So there's no special permit for additional dwellings on one lot, and no square footage limitation, and no public input on the square footage limitation of these additional dwellings on one lot. Am I getting that right?
Only sorry, somebody else answer that if that were Janelle.
Sure. Yeah, no, what's important to distinguish is it would be accessory dwelling units rather than dwelling units. And what the plan is proposing is there would be an ability so the state does not discern between attached or detached. And what the plan is proposing is that the town would allow for the potential for one attached and one detached.
And
And
we
those
would
are
leave it to P
accessory
and Z, right?
dwelling
We would-
units.
As Jonathan said, we would leave it to P and Z to decide.
Correct.
Right now, we have left it open to P and Z to decide on what that cap would be, Caroline.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, just all of the zoning reform measures that are suggestions, advisory in the plan go through the formal processes of P and Z. And will continue to do so.
Could I just also just correct one thing that Caroline used the word endorse in reference to P and Z. P and Z's role in terms of evaluating this plan is simply to make a statement whether or not the affordable housing plan is consistent with the town plan of conservation and development. In other words, our role as a planning body for Cornwall needs to show that this plan and the formal town plan will work together.
I'd also say, I think we did leave that open-ended as far as the size requirements, allowing P and Z to use their wisdom on that. But we do know that accessory apartments have been a very useful tool in town to give people that want a small place, a place to live. But also there have been limitations. Right now, there's 1,200 square foot limitation on a accessory apartment. And I know of a young family that lived in an accessory apartment. They had one child, but then they had a second child and they could not fit into their accessory apartment. And so they had to leave town, much to their disappointment and to the disappointment of the classmates of their child. So again, I think there is some room for latitude to make these, to build on our success, but it will be up to P and Z to see where that success leads us. So next question. Comment.
I hope I'm pronouncing this correct. Honora? You have to unmute yourself. There you go.
You can call me Nora. Hi.
Nora.
I just have an idea which is not meant to open a can of worms, but we had dinner recently with some family who live in a teeny little town in the state of Washington. And it has been very rural, but it's like Cornwall. There's the pressure from Seattle. It's becoming, their second home. And it was maybe exacerbated or accelerated during the COVID pandemic. And people were snapping up homes, and many people, not all people, but many people turned some of their properties into Airbnb rentals. And it kind of took housing out of the mix for locals. And there was, the family member told a very rather poignant story about telling one of these people who owned one house for themselves and 2 Airbnb properties, just what it meant to her. She couldn't find a place in town to live in. So long story short, because I don't really know any of the details, this small town just came up with one pretty simple rule or regulation, I should say, which was to require any rentals to be no less than 30 days. So this meant that the Airbnbs that were kind of flipping people through would have to allow for longer rentals. Okay, I know no more detail than that, but it struck me as an pretty good idea, because I know of one house in Cornwall that basically, I think it's just like a weekend place, and another place that's vastly overpriced. They could be a nice place for someone to live in if it were renting for something reasonable. Okay, over and out. I'm turning off my sound.
Thank you, Nora. We can always use good ideas. And it's good to be out and about and see how other towns are trying to deal with these issues.
Okay, next, Janet Carlson.
Hey, good evening, guys. So just for the record, I kind of dig contentious people. I'm the mother of 3 teenagers, and we have usually a whole horde of teenagers here, so contentious is okay by me. That being said, I do believe that most people move to Cornwall to be part of a community. I know I'm an N of 5 people here, but we lived in New York City for over 20 years, and I loved museums and I loved visiting them, but I sure didn't want to live one. The reason we chose Cornwall was because of community. Even as a New Yorker, we were part of the community, and we certainly have been a part of the community here. I know this is a contentious issue. I go to other towns and I hear about their struggles with affordable housing, attainable housing. My hope is that, because our town came together and we had a town meeting, many town meetings, and one of the main things that people talked about, we were all joined in the idea that we really wanted young people, we wanted families, we wanted more people to move here. So that being said, it was all different kinds of people were saying that, who had come together into these meetings. And that was the number one thing that I heard, was that we wanted to have more young people here. We need more volunteers, we need more fire people, and we certainly want to have more children for our schools. So it is my hope that that we can come together and make our town, our community inclusive for anybody who wants to live here, regardless of how much they make or what they do or what have you. I do hope that we can be the inclusive community that we've been historically, that we strive to be. Anybody who wants to be a part of our community, I say, let's make it available to them. And then my last comment will be, I want to thank Janelle. She has worked so hard on this and done such an amazing job. And it's not easy, but her expertise is so welcome. She is from Cornwall, and she has worked her rear end off for Cornwall, and I thank her for that. I was proud to be a part of this committee, and I applaud each of the members for the hard work, and I appreciate each and every person who showed up on a Wednesday night to be a part of this plan. So thank you, guys.
Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. I think it also, brings up that especially in a small town, you have to have a critical mass of people to make a town run, to make a community function, and they all have support roles that need to be filled, or else things don't happen. I think also we're at a critical time, whereas we know Connecticut has one of the highest percentage of young adults living with their parents. And again, do we want to have our kids stay and contribute to the town, or do we want to have them take the easy train to Florida or Colorado or somewhere else? We're very lucky at this point to have had an influx of people come, reverse migration from North Carolina, California, Brooklyn. But again, we've seen even in the 2020 census, and we welcome the baby carriages up and down our streets, but we've also seen, we have to look at the numbers, because a lot of these trends are hidden. And when we see in the 2020 census, even though we've gained population, we've lost 25% of our youngest residents, who in a lot of ways bring a lot of vibrancy and future to the town. So again, thank you, Janet. Next comment, please.
Okay, Michelle Ship, and then Nancy Berry. Go ahead, Michelle.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hi, everyone. I just kind of wanted to touch on this fear of private developers in bringing us affordable housing. I think we have to realize that we as citizens are private developers. Let me give you a personal story. More than a decade ago, my grandfather couldn't stay in his home anymore, so he needed to go somewhere else. His home became a home for a family. We rented his home out to a couple with 3 kids. They got to start their own home while he had income to support him in the new place he needed to be for his care. So by allowing the private developer to have rentals, that allows multi-families. My grandfather's house was small. It was 1 family's worth, but there are houses here that could be split to make 2 households for 2 families and to give that senior a place. And to piggyback on that, I think the ADU is a great idea. I don't think we should opt out at all. I think if somebody has 10 acres, 3 units on there would not be hardly anything you wouldn't notice. And personally, I think a single-story small ADU addresses senior housing like nobody's business. It allows people to share a property, and most of our seniors, as quiet as could be, they wouldn't be intrusive on the main lot. What a great way to keep our seniors in their house. They would then have their own house become a rental, and that rent pays for their ADU. I mean, it all is cyclical, and not only do we keep our seniors in town, but we bring the new family. And I just like to say the energy that I saw at the Newcomers Tea this Saturday says our town is not headed to become a museum, and I for one applaud that. The energy, the families, everything we saw at that Newcomers Tea, I would like to see more of that. And I think we can accomplish that if we welcome ADUs and private developers, being homeowners or whatever it is, that is not going to be a corporation. It doesn't have to be that. We as Cornwall can come together and solve this problem together. I love this plan. I see a lot of potential in it. Tax abatements for those people who want to put up ADUs. God bless you, Anna, for coming up with that. I think it would be a great thing for it. So I support this plan. I thank the commission for all the work they did. If I didn't watch you on Zoom, I watched it on YouTube, and a lot of thought went into this. So thank you all very much. And please don't let our town become a museum.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. Appreciate your thoughts. I think it's also important to, put out there that over the last 10 years, the town of Cornwall has averaged 1 house constructed a year. That's not a boom. And there's probably more houses being actually taken down than are actually being constructed. So we have a long ways to go before we get overrun by development. Also, we're the least densely populated town in the state and have one of the highest percentages of preserved land of any town in the state. So there are things that will keep Cornwall absolutely recognizable in the coming years. And, there's a lot of fear of change. There's a lot of fear of changing regulations. But I think, what I don't say I fear, but one thing that motivates me is the constant stream of people that come to me as a town leader and say, I've reached a certain age, there's no place for me to live in town, or I grew up here and I would like to live, but there's no place for me here. And, that's a constant conversation that I have. And so I think we do need some innovation in our thinking, and this puts some new thoughts through. This is a living document. Will be reviewed annually as one of its recommendations, and it's only good for 5 years. And as we've seen, things change. So there's built-in review and process in this.
Okay, Nancy Berry, and then Rebecca Ridgeway. Go ahead.
Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, John. I have read every word of this housing plan at least 3 times. My husband will tell you it is highlighted in pink and yellow and different colors for each reading. I thought it was a very impressive piece of work. And I realize that P&Z has got a lot of work ahead of them. But I've heard a lot of comments tonight about the physical building, the bricks and mortar. But there's a lot more to it. We're talking individual lives, people with heartbeats and hopes and dreams right now in Cornwall who are on waiting lists for housing at Cougaman and at Bonnybrook. I have a grandson in this category. He's been looking now for over a year and waiting, and it's not an easy process. We're talking about real people now. A lot of this is going to have to be off in the future. You can't build something overnight, but we can open up what we do have here. And I implore people, if you have a space that is separate from your house, that is not used very much, think and consider about renting it to many of the young people. There are 18 people on the waiting list right now for Cougaman Village. An apartment opens up every 2 years, if I read this correctly. The same is true for Bonnybrook. And I just hope we can remember that there are young folks here in Cornwall now. As Gordon said, Connecticut is one of the top 3 states for young folks between the ages of 18 and 34 living with their parents, because we are not an affordable state. We have to be welcoming and be creative and realize these are real people. And Gordon, if you recall, many years ago, you were not the selectman at the time, but my dad was walking on River Road and he found a longtime Cornwall resident living in his van. He'd lost his home. And the selectman prior, who I believe was Bob Beers, and my dad came up with a rather wild concoction, but it worked for 10 years. And because of the way that worked, there were tax incentives for the property owner. And so I think we maybe need to think about that as we develop accessory housing. If it's used in a creative way, we need to, for housing that, accessible housing that is truly for folks who are paying but paying 30% of their income on housing. We need to figure that out, because a lot of the accessory housing doesn't come under that category. So just some things to think about, that there are real heartbeats beating behind this need. And Cornwall has always welcomed people and always tried to make things possible for all the people who work here and want and need to live here. The cost of gasoline and commuting is crazy right now. So we need to think of all of these things. And thank you for listening. I'm sorry I was impassioned about that, but it affects me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nancy. And I think, humanizing things is really important, because it's not just data. It's not just, as you said, bricks and mortar, but it's really keeping, a heartbeat going in the town. The town always has looked after its people and welcome people in, as you said. And I think this is continuing a very long trend that's happened. And I know my predecessors, going back to the earliest days of this town, were in charge of keeping people that were hungry from starving. And, again, you think about our explosion in need at the food pantry, it's right there. We're right back in the same place. And we would like, again, to get people on a firmer basis and do our small part. As Ingrid said, this makes a huge difference in people's lives. I've seen it, so it is very important to try to do what we can to try to push this forward. So again, thank you for your comments. And again, I like your idea. We have to be innovative. This is a smart town, and it knows how to innovate when necessary. We were, I think, one of the first towns to adopt the accessory apartment regulations, and that's been a big success and made a bunch of housing available for people. And it's also allowed homeowners to finance their house by having some rental income. So again, that's a win-win. There's no government programs involved. It's a win-win. We need to expand on our win category.
Okay, Rebecca Ridgeway.
Hi, I just wanted to give a different perspective as a young person who is currently living across the hall from my parents. And this is an issue that's I'm really passionate about, and that has nothing really to do with the fact that my dad's also on this call, but more to do with the fact that I grew up here, and my parents didn't move here to for it to be a museum, and came here to for that community, as Janet said. And I think it's important to kind of not separate those two. I think that there is a really clear path forward, or maybe not clear, but there is a path forward where we can keep the beautiful aesthetics of this town while not making it a place where you have to make a lot of money in order to buy a house, and because that is not attainable for most people. I mean, I just am thinking, as someone who loves horses, of all the barns in Connecticut. And I would love to live in a barn, a renovated barn, something like that. And for it to become something super controversial, if you put a bed and a kitchen in there versus just building a barn for yourself, I think kind of separating this idea of what affordable housing looks like in other places and what it could be in Cornwall is really important, because I think we can maintain the beautiful aesthetic while making a more inclusive and vibrant place. I know that the thing that really I love about Cornwall is the diversity of types of people. Yes, there are definitely a lot of people that are coming from New York City looking for a second home and then falling in love with Cornwall, but there's also a good variety of people that have been drawn to the area for other reasons. And I think supporting all types of people is really important. And I don't think all our goals are incompatible. I really think that having a McMansion that could be converted into a multi-housing unit is possible, and I think that it's kind of hard for me to conceptualize that the fact that someone could build a really huge house and no one's going to say anything about it, but as soon as you put multiple families in there, it all of a sudden becomes a very controversial and kind of fearful thing for people. I think that there are a lot of options that will meet a lot of people's goals, and I'm excited because I hope that more of my peers will be able to live in Cornwall because it's such a great place to be.
Okay, thank you.
Anne Trowbridge.
Yes. Thank you. I had a couple of questions, and that is, one is, was there any study of what the current barriers are to people subdividing houses or building accessory apartments now in town? Was that looked at all? And are there ways that can be encouraged since it is acceptable under the current zoning to do that? That would seem to be the low-hanging fruit. So that's one question. The other is, we really would benefit, I think, from smaller units and multi-unit buildings for energy savings and climate change adaptation. It really is important for us to try to contribute to that. This 2-family or more house is more energy efficient. And also you may have the added benefit of having people together closer and able to share other things like a car or carpool to work or school. So there are real benefits for energy and climate change adaptation to having more people living close to each other.
Great. Some good points there, Ann, and I'm sure we could do some more research on barriers to ADUs in Cornwall. I would also just again like to accentuate the positive in your statement. I know some people have found that have told me the benefits of having another family share their house, especially as they get older. There's obvious things, loneliness, and it's good to share trips to the grocery store, whatever else. So again, I think it's something that should be encouraged, is already happening, and should be allowed to expand. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, I wanted to say something too, as someone who lives in an accessory dwelling unit. And I work for the town. I'm the assistant here at the selectman's office. You heard my mother earlier, Nancy. I'm John Barry, and I moved here to be closer to family. And I was sitting here at work one day, and a local Town Street resident walked in, I think to get a burn permit, and I was maybe my first or second week on the job, and she asked me, well, how long have you been in Cornwall? And I told her the story, you know, that I've spent all my summers here as a kid, and I worked at the Cream Hill Lake Association as a lifeguard, and moved up here at the end of 2019 to be closer to my folks and my brother. And she said, well, where are you living? I said, at my parents' house. And she said, oh, well, you should come check out my pole barn. And I said, what, is it available? And she said, yeah, sure. And I ended up moving in. I've been living there for the past 18 months. And I'm really fortunate. It's just a wonderful neighborhood to live in. And without that opportunity, I would either have to, I wouldn't be able, and I work for the town, I wouldn't be able to afford anything in Cornwall. I would either have to live somewhere else and commute, or live with my parents. So I'm really happy to be working for the town, and I'm really happy to have my pole barn up on Town Street. Thanks.
Thank you, John. And just as full confession, I lived with my parents for 7 years before I moved into a pole barn. So anyway, it may be a Cornwall thing. But anyway, thank you for the stories. Yes, Ingrid.
Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, I just want to sort of add my thanks to everybody for these comments. It's just, they're very moving, and we really appreciate them both, but also really appreciate the constructive feedback as well. And again, we will underscore, we'll take all these comments into account. I do just want to read off two comments that people submitted. One was from a while ago. I'm not sure who JWWZ is, but saying, I want to comment that my family and I absolutely did not move to Cornwall to live in a museum. Yes, Cornwall is beautiful and historic, but it is also a wonderful place to raise a family with the support of a strong and close-knit community. And also, Rebecca also added, that I would like to second the point about Anne's point about the environmental benefit of affordable and smaller housing. Cornwallians are nothing if not passionate about the environment, and I think we have a wonderful opportunity for sustainable development here. And I think, and I will sort of also underscore that point. It's not clear to me. It's not clear to me. We could probably do a better job of bringing that out in the plan as well. So just note to the committee, but thank you for that comment. Thank you to Rebecca and thank you to Anne.
Great. Yes, and I do like the fact we're getting a variety of comments here too. I mean, I often say Cornwall is not homogenized milk. I mean, there are a variety of people here with a variety of orientations, outlooks, and everything else. So you are going to get that. And so appreciate the comments. Are there any other comments at this point?
Becky?
I was not planning to say anything, but one of the words that is striking me is trust. I thank all of you for how much work you put into this, but I also think that it's really important, at least I feel a sense of trust of what you've invested. I know that you all care about the town, and I trust your ability to carry us and to look for the best things. And I just feel like that's a good word to put out there.
Thank you, Becky. And I don't think we would be as confident in our ideas if we hadn't had some past success. As I've said, the town started some of these efforts 30 years ago, and they have made a difference in people's lives. They made a difference in the community. We have had accessory apartments for a long time. And we know who's lived there, got a foothold in the place, and how that's worked out. And again, we've all felt the heartache when people have had to leave the place because there was no room for them in the inn. And that's something that's a long-term thing that we're working on. And again, it's been a lot of people doing things and a lot of good work and success.
Margie Purnell?
Yeah, let me see if I can. Hi, everybody. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who has participated and worked on this literally through the months. I'm very appreciative of it. I've been involved in land use for quite a while, for better and for worse. I submitted a bunch of fairly detailed comments earlier, and I'm hoping that you all will sort of think about those. The ADUs to me seem to be a very interesting concept, and I think the resistance that you might be hearing is more regarding the lack of the special permit process for those. So, the possibility exists that, that Cornwall continue to have ADUs, promote those in a number of different ways, and then still retain the special permit process so that there is a mechanism to ensure that just instead of having an as of right ADU maybe placed in a bizarre location or something that's not going to be suitable in a neighborhood, that it's going to fit. And that way we get to have our cake and eat it too. And, I love the idea of having a diversity of people in town. I think it's fabulous. I'm glad that the affordable housing plan is being developed. I look forward to it sort of renewing and evolving. And I certainly would hope that we're going to get a little more specific as we move forward. And it is my understanding, my only question for the gang right now is that based upon my reading of the document, that we're actually trying to achieve 30 units all told in 5 years, or have I completely misunderstood? So that's it for me. Thanks.
Okay, Janelle, do you have an answer for that?
Yeah, so the metrics that were thrown into the plan were definitely aspirational goals for that 5 years. So the committee did really go for it. 30 units in 5 years, given the cadence of construction, certainly certainly is very ambitious, but the plan simply suggests what can happen. It isn't actually the actions. And I think that does need to come for more housing choice in town. And thank you. Those detailed comments were received.
Thank you.
Looking for hands. Anyone else?
Hey, Jonathan, this is Toby Corneo. I can't figure out how to raise my hand. I don't know why, but
Oh, no worries.
if there's no other hand, I just have a couple comments. One is just to go back to this comment about the museum. I was one of the people that was initially quite concerned about the Cogswell Road Bridge being torn down. And it touched on a lot of things that I think have been spoken about in town that have to do with the historic sort of architecture that we've been gifted over the past 200 years, and the historic landscape. And I sense in people's comments and concerns and worries about opening up the entire town to multifamily housing is that there's sort of this fear that you're going to look over to a beautiful field and see an apartment building smack dab in the middle, or a big parking lot, or something like that. And I feel like with all of this coming together and the changes in planning and zoning and this affordable housing plan and other public discussions in our town, we've been articulating in different ways sort of this love of these older buildings, these moments around town, these intersections, these fields, these walls, that were touched on years ago in a plan. It was in the late 2000s. It was called the King's Mark Plan, and it's available in its entirety on I think it's the Cornwall Conservation Trust website or commission. It's one of those two. And in there, it called for doing an inventory of all the buildings in town, and using the resources of the State Historic Preservation Office and the Connecticut Preservation Trust to really understand the assets that we have, the built assets that we have. And I would just like for part of the affordable housing plan or part of the discussions to figure out ways that we can kind of burnish what we have while adding to it, or, inserting new things in ways that are really respectful of what we have already. And I don't know if that's the special permit process, or if it's, sort of a souped up site planning, or more visual, pictures and diagrams when things are submitted. But I hear it in a lot of people's comments in different ways. And I think it's really important, if we're going to be trying to encourage a lot more development and land use in town, that we articulate those things that are really important to us that we want to be considered when new insertions are being proposed. So that's one thing. And so the museum aspect is not really to, I think, make things not change. It's really to preserve and protect the good things that we have and understand what they need in order to last into the next generation. So that's one thing. And then the other thing is we have so many architects in town and so many, big old houses, and could there be a call to both homeowners and architects to kind of pair up and chip away at that 30, put up one of those, barometers or whatever, where you're raising money and people can sign up and match up and come up with a way to do an accessory apartment on their property. I feel like there could be a lot of really good creative solutions just
Great
coming
idea.
by pairing people up and supporting it in some kind of managed effort. So those are my two comments.
Yeah, I think those are some great ideas. I know when the Housing Corporation developed some parcel programs, there was very generous contributions, I believe, from local architects in designing some of the houses that were built, to the point that you can't, when you drive around town, you can't even tell which houses are part of the parcel program compared to other houses. And that was one thing that I had thought of a long time ago, was if the town did acquire some land to have a small house contest to really do some innovative design, for, smaller houses, energy efficient houses, environmentally benign houses. Again, the resources may not be there on the governmental scale, but hopefully one thing our regulations will allow is some creativity to allow smaller houses with a smaller footprint in town. So that's one of the justifications for not having strict limits on at least this early draft plan, is to allow some creativity in design process, because certainly some small houses can be less intrusive and less impactful than some bigger ones, which right now can be permitted without any review or impact. So again, I think there is room for collaboration with the creative folk around. Thank you.
Can I just make one addition? I just want to also reinforce Anne's point about the sort of climate change and resiliency and the benefits of more dense development. Just my one concern about lots of small houses is sort of lots of driveways that need to be plowed and lots of individual maintenance lists that accumulate over time. And that I do think that there are places around Cornwall where one could build extremely dense housing, with a building that you would not even see from the street, with underground parking and things like that. And I just wonder, in your discussions in the task force, have you found other examples around Connecticut and these smaller towns where they've been able to make strategic investments in infrastructure that could support a 50-unit apartment building when there is no city sewer? What kind of site improvements are available and technologies are available that would support that kind of thing?
Haven't gone down the path towards the 50-unit apartment house. The closest thing I think that we've accomplished is over time is the Bonnybrook, which I think has 10 apartments on an acre, 2 acres, something like that. And that was pretty much maxing out that site. But I don't think we have done case studies, although I know there are places that people have explored where they have tied in a bunch of, a greater density with less impact. And I know they've done some work, I think down in Kent. People have looked around Kent, Norfolk have, very, 5 units or whatever that are sort of in an old farmhouse type place that people have looked at, that we would, I think, be open to having some arrangements like that. But again, we're probably in smaller numbers. But again, in part of the good thing about being a smaller town, you don't have to have as bigger numbers to make a pretty substantial impact. So anything else out there on the screen, John?
Karen Nelson.
Karen Nelson herself.
The Karen Nelson.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. Well, I just want to quickly commend everybody on this board. I have had the pleasure since I came to Cornwall, January 2nd of 2007, to have the opportunity to work in a very progressive town. I live in New Hartford. I'm sitting here in a 225-year-old house that could fall down around my head at any time. And I have valued the people that I have worked with. I started with Rick Lynn and David Colbert and Jill Cutler, who was an exceptional chairperson who led the Affordable Housing Subcommittee for the town plan, who was allowed a lot of openness and a lot of research in preparing the housing part of the town plan of conservation development. I'm so glad to see you back here in the saddle, Joe Cutler. I now have the privilege of working with Anna Tamel, whose passion and tenacity is just never ending. I give her a lot of credit. And I went from Tom McGowan, who worked in many towns, including in New Hartford, Barkhampton, many of the neighboring towns that around New Hartford, who was very proactive in looking at accessory apartment regulations. And Tom McGowan has been followed by a young planner who brings the same passion, the same newness and intelligence that we need by having young people be our partners, because it is our job as us older people to make this a better place for young people to come to. And I have to say, I commend you all, and I thank you for the exceptional work that you're doing on this. And I'm very proud, and I'm very proud to work with a young person like Jonathan, and I call him Jonathan because without his expertise sitting in Gordon's office, my office would not run as easily. We need young people. We need fresh ideas. We need to build it so they will come. I just wish New Hartford could follow in your pathway. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Appreciate all your hard work. And I would say that I know there are some people on the call. There are architects in town, there are builders in town, there are people with big ideas. So part of the reason when people said, what about private developers? There are people that approach me, what about if I got together a group of investors and put up, 5 small apartments for elderly people, market rate apartments, that there's a huge need for that. And again, I think part of the reason this is a plan, this is not a regulation, nothing changes, nothing will change by itself by adopting this, but we need to sort of open up some of our creativity and make some of those, ideas come to fruition. And there's plenty of ways, and there's plenty of review, there's plenty of ways to do things. But again, I know that there's potential out there to meet these unmet needs at this point. So that's one of the reasons why we wanted to have a little creativity flow forward. Any other thoughts, comments? Appreciate it if there's anybody watching this afterwards. I know there are people, again, that have come up and with identified needs or ideas. Feel free to keep on submitting that. I believe Janelle will take these comments, look at some possible revisions with the committee at our meeting next Monday. So stay tuned. And again, thank you all for coming out. I like the variety of comments and appreciate all your time. So last chance for comments, thoughts.
There is one more. I don't know, Ingrid, are you seeing the last question in the chat from Michelle? Or
no, I don't see that. I think that's up to you.
Yeah, let me go ahead and read this. It's probably and Maggie Cooley might be able to answer this. The question is from Michelle Ship. It says, can a rental property be built on a parcel program lot? Instead of a family building their own home, could someone build a home there and then rent it?
Currently, that's not a possibility. Our lease says that there is no subletting or renting of a parcel program house, because people have applied and for a set of specifications, and there'd be no guarantee that the person to whom they'd rent would be that. And it was a home ownership program rather than a rental or entrepreneurial program. So the answer is no, the way the lease now reads.
Okay.
All right. So anyway, thank you all for coming to the forum. Again, we're planning to have another hearing on December 8th on a revised plan. But as we said, a lot of these concepts are coming out of the plan of conservation development, and we will further work on this. So anyway, appreciate your input, and thank you all. And we'll see you soon. Take care. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
All right.
Good night.
Everyone.